In 1995, World Championship Wrestling put some serious pressure on the World Wrestling Federation with the launch of WCW Monday Nitro. Nitro would go head to head with the WWF's flagship television show Monday Night Raw in a Monday Night ratings battle, and it was awesome. To be a fan during that time period with the names we had in wrestling and the shots being fired from both companies on Monday nights, it was truly a great time to be a wrestling fan. Of course, those days are long gone now. We do have AEW taking on NXT on Wednesday nights, but the Wednesday night ratings battle we see today just doesn't compare to the 90s Monday Night War. While Eric Bischoff and Ted Turner creating WCW Nitro was a shot fired in itself, the first shot that had some malicious intent happened on the second episode of Nitro. Airing on the 11th of September 1995, Nitro was live on this night, whereas Raw was a pre-taped show. People within the industry knew what already happened on Raw before it was broadcasted on TV screens, but fans at home wouldn't know the results of Raw. Keep in mind, this is pre-consumer internet days. Nobody had results at their fingertips. Of course, people who subscribed to dirt sheets or the hardest of hardcore fans could find out what happened on Raw before it aired, but your general everyday wrestling audience was kept in the dark until Raw went on the air. This wasn't a new thing either, this was frequent within wrestling TV shows. Anyway, with Nitro being live on the 11th of September and Raw being pre-taped, Eric Bischoff decided to give away the Raw results while commentating for WCW. During Sting's entrance on this episode of Nitro, Eric Bischoff told everyone what would happen in Raw's main event when he said, "Hey, by the way, if you're tempted to grab the remote control and check out the competition, don't bother, it's 2 or 3 weeks old. Shawn Michaels beats the big guy with a super kick he couldn't earn a green belt with in the local YMCA. Stay right here, we are live, this is where the action is." While this indeed was a low blow, it also worked. Bischoff saw this tactic as a winner. He continued giving away Raw results on his live Nitro show in the weeks and months that followed. Vince McMahon and the WWF could simply not afford to go live every week during this time period, as crazy as that sounds today. So he would need to find another way to fire shots back at WCW and Eric Bischoff. And so, after waiting for months to retaliate, the Billionaire Ted skits were written. What's so interesting about these skits, really, is that they give us a look into exactly what Vince McMahon must have been feeling at the time, projected here through these segments on WWF programming. The Billionaire Ted skits were a series of comedy segments that aired on WWF programming beginning on January 1st, 1996. The skits featured parody versions of Ted Turner, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage and Mean Gene Okerlund. Over time, the skits would become more and more personal, eventually leading to the USA Network ordering Vince McMahon to stop creating the segments, or the USA Network relationship with the WWF would be in jeopardy. Let's go back then and watch every skit and also analyse what was said during these segments, just to see if they did really warrant a cease and desist from the USA Network. So the first Raw of 1996, quite an interesting show in itself. The WWF promoted the Raw Bowl during this show, a match where 4 tag teams would compete in an elimination match, with the special rule being that anyone could get tagged in at any time, meaning tag partners could face each other in the ring. It wasn't great, but anyway, on this show also, we got an announcement that Vader would be making his WWF debut at the Royal Rumble, but it was the Billionaire Ted skit that was probably most remembered. After the Raw Bowl tag match, we get to see a clip of the Nacho Man snapping into a Slim Jim and hurting his teeth while doing so. At the end of the show, we get the first skit from inside Billionaire Ted's wrestling war room. The skit starts off in a meeting room with Billionaire Ted, the Huckster, the Nacho Man, Scheme Gene and some television producers in attendance. One of the producers was played by Vince Russo, by the way. Billionaire Ted says he wants to see more action on his WCW programming, and a producer shows Razor Ramon, Ahmed Johnson and Diesel pulling off their signature moves. The producers ask the Huckster and the Nacho Man if they could pull off these same finishing moves, and both men say no. When Billionaire Ted asks his aging wrestlers what can they do, they begin doing their tried and true ring taunts. The skit ends with a voiceover saying you can't teach old dogs new tricks, and the WWF is on top of the hill, not over it. Looking back now, yeah, it feels like a cheap shot, but remember, Nitro were giving away Raw's results on air, so all's fair in love and war, I guess. The main message the WWF were sending here is that WCW has old, used up dinosaurs that are still doing the same thing they have done for the past lot of years. The very next week, Raw ended again with another Billionaire Ted skit. Before we get there, Scheme Gene showed up during Jim Ross's Royal Rumble report, saying he will reveal a special entrant in the Royal Rumble a little later. Later in the broadcast, Scheme Gene says that fans have to phone his hotline to find out who the secret entrant is, the WWF taking jabs here at Mean Gene's WCW hotline. After some convincing, Gene says his secret entrant is Vader, something we already knew from the week before. Just a quick side note, the WWF couldn't claim to be saints when it came to wrestling hotlines either. Later on, we are back in the war room and Ted wants a new slogan for his wrestling company. His producers suggest ripping off other companies, such as Raw's slogan Uncut, Uncooked and Uncensored, but Ted says they have already ripped off other companies way too much. Nacho Man suggests the slogan Where the Big Boys Play, and Ted says he likes it. It's just dishonest enough to work for WCW. The Huckster then suggests a slogan around WCW not testing their wrestlers and having no wellness policy, and Ted says that the Huckster's idea was way too honest. The skit ends with the voiceover saying nothing's old or unofficial with the WWF. This one went a step further than last week, bringing up wellness policies and stuff like that changed these instantly from being somewhat lighthearted to all out slanderous, and after Vince's court trial, you'd think he would keep any mentioning of wellness testing away from his television shows, but here we are. This one just seemed to cut a little deeper. Now would be a good time to check out how WCW reacted to this on TV. On the January 8th episode of Nitro, the commentators spoke about how packed their show would be, and they talked about how the other wrestling company, in reference to the WWF of course, wouldn't be offering all this action for free. What I found interesting though is that if you actually listen out for it, Eric Bischoff does a lot of talking on this show about young stars in WCW. For example, when Chris Benoit and Brian Pillman come out, Bischoff talks about how they are the new breed of the Four Horsemen. When Alex Wright comes out, Bischoff talks about how WCW is the only place to see young, fresh international talent. Maybe I'm overanalyzing this a little, but when you're actually listening out for these things, knowing that the Billionaire Ted skits were airing on Raw, you notice that Eric Bischoff was definitely trying to reinforce the fact that WCW did actually have up-and-coming stars on their show. When William Regal faces Eddie Guerrero, again, Bischoff mentions international stars and young talent within the company. Interesting stuff, but we will talk about WCW's reactions a little bit later on. The next episode of Raw did not have a Billionaire Ted skit. This was the go-home show for the 1996 Royal Rumble. On the Royal Rumble show, however, we were back in the wrestling war room. Billionaire Ted says he has bought everything he could ever want, but he can't buy the WWF. He asks his producers why his wrestling show can't compete with the World Wrestling Federation, and he is told that the WCW superstars are nothing but greedy and disloyal has-beens from the 80s. Nacho Man is quick to correct the producer, saying he has been wrestling since the 70s. The skit ends with Billionaire Billionaire Ted asking the Huckster if WCW should start calling him the boy toy in reference to Shawn Michaels. The following night on Raw, Billionaire Ted explains that he made his empire by buying old things and repackaging them, from old cartoons to old movies and of course old wrestlers. Ted says he is tired of stealing things. He wants his producers to come up with just one original idea. His team look baffled. Hogan falls asleep, but then Scheme Jeans says he has a great idea, but Ted has to phone Jean's hotline to hear all about it. The producers all pull out their phones as the segment ends. The voiceover guy tells us not to fall for cheap imitations, and this one, I admit, did make me chuckle a bit. The next week then, we are out of the wrestling war room and we are at a WCW press conference. Ted comes out with the Nacho Man and the Huckster, and Ted says that contrary to what the WWF want people to believe, he is not a hillbilly and he does not wear cheap suits. So straight away, the WWF were attacking Ted here on a more personal level. Nothing to do with wrestling in the opening here, just straight up attacking. Ted takes questions from the media in attendance. The first question asks Ted if his $4 billion empire is trying to put the WWF out of business, which he doesn't answer. He is then asked if it's true that he puts on double the amount of programming that the WWF does, but still cuts down on advertiser rates. Some pretty serious shots being fired here. Ted again doesn't answer the question. He is then asked if he put Nitro on the air to simply compete with the WWF, and again Ted doesn't answer. The next question Ted doesn't answer is why, if he owns networks and can put wrestling on in any time slot, did he choose to put Nitro on Monday nights, and wouldn't it be better for fans if it was on a different night altogether? Nacho Man is asked who will win in the WrestleMania 12 geriatric match pitting him against the Huckster, and the Huckster says he has a contract with Billionaire Ted that states he never has to lose. Each question is just cutting deeper and deeper. The final question then, is there anything Ted Turner wouldn't do to put the WWF out of business? He answers that he wouldn't use his own money, and the segment ends on a cliffhanger, to be continued. The next week we're back where we left off. This one's a little shorter though, and it's more about Ted Turner's business dealings and less about WCW versus WWF. Ted is asked about the Time Warner merger and if this will be damaging for his current stockholders. Ted says he doesn't care about the stockholders, it's all fun for him. He is motivated by power and money and he wants to own everything. The segment goes off the air, but we then see an advertisement, a legit advertisement, that Vince McMahon sent to newspapers. Vince says that this advertisement was rejected by the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, but a modified version would be printed in the New York Times financial section that very week. This advertisement here calls on Turner stockholders, saying that Ted Turner has wasted their money due to his personal vendetta against the WWF. Keep in mind, this is a legitimate advertisement. To understand this a little, it's pretty clear that WCW's own revenue stream at the time wasn't enough to afford guys like Hulk Hogan, and so WCW was using money from other Turner ventures, mainly Turner Home Entertainment, to fund guys like Hogan and Savage, all in the name of hurting the WWF. It's absolutely crazy to think Vince McMahon wanted this printed in newspapers. He wanted to deliver a punch right to the Turner Empire Foundation by going after its shareholders. Totally nuts. Around this time too, the USA Network were noticing what Vince was doing and they kept a close eye on what would happen next. The next week, Billionaire Ted went on the Larry Fling live talk show to answer some questions about his recent business dealings and his personal vendetta against the World Wrestling Federation. This was kind of funny too. The first caller was Randy Savage, asking if Ted had any hair thinning products he could buy. Hogan phones in and he asks if he can have next Monday off because he was hit with a high-heeled shoe. This was in reference to getting hit with Miss Elizabeth's footwear on the previous episode of Nitro. A lady calls in to tell Ted Turner that Sears called and his cheap suit is now ready. Ted is then asked about the vendetta against the WWF and he is asked about other Turner divisions funding Hulk Hogan's contract. He is also asked if it's true that one of his very own staff members was a convicted stock swindler. Turner doesn't answer, pretending to have a sore throat. The next week, the Huckster and Nacho Man are on Larry Fling Live. The segment starts off by making fun of the superstar's baldness, and in no time at all, the guys are asked why they left the World Wrestling Federation. Nacho Man says they couldn't keep up with the WWF's new generation of superstars. Billionaire Ted shows up via satellite, and Larry says if Ted pays him the same money he pays the Huckster, he too will put on yellow tights and beat up these two has-beens who are sitting across from him. When the Huckster goes to attack Larry, Larry pulls out a high-heeled shoe which makes the Huckster retreat. The segment ends with Nacho Man telling the Huckster that fans only wear his merch because it gets handed out for free at WCW TV shows, and we go off the air with the Huckster and Nacho Man beating each other up with cartoony sound effects added for the sake of it. The following week, Billionaire Ted was on a quiz show, and you can tell this is where things got really personal. It was at this point here where it wasn't about wrestling, it was a personal vendetta getting aired on a TV network. The segment starts off with this message. The following satire is intended to entertain and inform. The quotes contained herein are actual quotes by the man who could control 50% of America's cable systems, Ted Turner. The segment starts and quotes are shown on the screen that paint Ted Turner as greedy, sexist, and there's even a quote with Ted Turner talking about the colour of people's skin. The following week on Raw, Scheme Gene presented the geriatric match report to promote the upcoming match between the Huckster and the Nacho Man at WrestleMania 12's free-for-all show, showing the Huckster training for his match here and struggling to do so. The March 18th edition of Raw saw Billionaire Ted reenact the famous "You can't handle the truth" line from the movie A Few Good Men. Ted is asked if he is trying to end the WWF, and he tries to dodge the question, saying he is trying to compete, he is trying to make money, but when he is pushed and pushed on the question, he finally admits that he is indeed trying to kill the World Wrestling Federation. A notice is shown on the screen saying that Ted Turner could own over 50% of cable television outlets if the Time Warner merger is approved, and those who are concerned about this should write to the FTC. It had gotten out of hand by this point, and the USA Network ordered Vince McMahon to stop the Billionaire Ted skits. The Huckster vs Nacho Man match would happen in the WrestleMania free-for-all, a pre-taped match that Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler commentated over while joking about Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, but that was it. The Billionaire Ted stuff had ran for nearly 2 months, and Vince McMahon was told to stop. It had gotten too personal, it wasn't about wrestling anymore, it was about Vince McMahon painting Ted Turner in the absolute worst light possible. Due to how personal things had gotten, the USA Network insisted that the WWF sent future scripts in advance to the network, and the USA Network would also have one of their own staff placed inside the WWF creative team for a period of time. Ted Turner, meanwhile, apparently got a kick out of the segments. He wasn't offended at all, and it's been said on more than one occasion that he found the skits funny, even saying so himself on TV, while also mentioning that Vince McMahon must have been really hurting to resort to this kind of stuff. Hulk Hogan too, when talking about the skits nowadays, doesn't seem to be that bothered, but we won't know how he felt at the time. It's been reported though that Randy Savage, on the flip side, was angry about the segments. He didn't like how he was called disloyal and over the hill. In the end, the Billionaire Ted skit started off pretty well. It wasn't great, but it had its moments. Over time though, it turned petty, highlighting the mindset of Vince McMahon here as the weeks went on. In a way also, even though it was all in a bad light, the WWF mentioning their competition in this way probably made fans turn over to see if what they were saying was true. The WWF highlighted how WCW was going to put them out of business, and if you were a fan who never watched WCW, chances are you would switch over to see what all the fuss was about. But when all is said and done, yes, I think the Billionaire Ted skits were a bad move. It took up too much TV time, and in a way, it all backfired on Vince McMahon and the WWF.